And hello IB Biology, and welcome to your first Google Classroom tutorial. And following this YouTube tutorial, we are going to attempt to answer the questions on our Osmosis lab that we did the other day. And I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible, but this is attempting to replace us in the computer labs in our school, and there isn't really much better way to do this. And I've also had good success with this over the last few years. So if you're lost on something, make sure you go back on this video and look at a part where you were stuck at. You do not have to listen to every single detail, but you do want your graph and your table to look exactly like what I'm presenting. And I'll say it again, but if your graph and table do not look exactly like the ones I'm going to show you, you need to go back and figure out how to do it. Likewise, do not wait until the last minute, because if there is something that you cannot figure out, I would gladly help you, but you need to be able to obviously not wait until the last minute to do that. So without further ado, make sure you get on Google Classroom in order to do this. I'm sure you're here right now watching this video. You'll go under here to classwork, which again, I'm sure you're on, and I will have your assignment posted here, but obviously I don't have the assignment yet because I am making it. And on there, you're going to find this YouTube video, which of course you're watching, and you're going to find another thing, and that is a template file. This is your assignment here for Osmosis in potato core soaked in varying concentrations of salt water. You are going to do two things first. You are going to paste a copy of your table, and then you're going to paste a copy of your graph right here like this. When your table and graph are posted, you're going to answer your analysis questions, and there are several on here. So in order to do any of that, you need to have a table and a graph. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and open Microsoft Excel. I have uploaded a copy of this template. This is all the student groups who did turn in results, and you can see on here that this is the block number, or the blocks for second block in the lab stations. And then you can see third block, I put your results right there. There were a few groups that did not turn in data, so I did not put you on here. So the reason I'm throwing it all like this is I not only want to teach you how to make your graph, but I want to teach you how to make a table. Because after all, we are in this class and we're going to try to learn how to use this data processing software for future labs. And as frustrating as it is, follow very closely. So notice on our table here, we've got our raw data, which is the numbers you collected from your experiment. But we also have a couple things. We have the changing salt concentrations. This is called our independent variable. And then, of course, we have the different trials of this. And if you notice, we have a good number of trials. It looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-ish trials. These are taken from all the groups. All of these trials are what we call the dependent variable, what we're measuring. So before we do anything further, we're going to want to label our independent variable and our dependent variable. Let's go ahead and do that real quick. To put our title up there, obviously there's no room, so click anywhere on the top line and then right click and it'll say insert, and then you're going to go entire row. It's going to insert an entire row above it. But we also need a title off to the side of where our trials are, and to do this you click on any of these, right click and say insert entire column. So we've given us a little space over here and given us space over there, and you can do this if you ever want to do a lab and modify that. That's how you do that. So let's go ahead and put our title up there. Now you're going to have to type this in, but just to save time on the video, I've already gone ahead and typed this in, and I just put it in this box right there like this. Now if you notice, if you notice here that this does not quite fit in the cells when you type this in, it's just kind of applying it to this one cell. And Microsoft Excel does this. You notice that each thing is in a cell of its own, and they're not connected together. So how do we get this entire title to cover the independent variable section? And the way to do that is you just highlight the entire row, and we're going to merge them together with this tool, Merge and Center. And that's done. Next thing we want to do is we want to be able to put our dependent variable title off to the side here. So what we're going to do is simply highlight all this as well and go to Merge and Center again. And I'm just going to go ahead and type in our dependent variable title. That would be the % change in mass. And that's going to be it. Now notice it doesn't fit very well there, so again we're going to have to click on that and go to Wrap Text, and it's all done for us. but I don't like that it's not centered. So let's do one more thing, and that is click on it like this. And if you come up here to your format section, we've got this entire section merged. We have it wrapped where it all fits in there. But let's go ahead and go up to this section here. This is where it's called middle align. We can do a top align, bottom, or middle like this. And of course, you probably know now you can also center and change the text, but let's go ahead and middle align it and center the text like that. Okay? So right now this is looking good. We just need to now modify a few extra things. So to do this part, let's go ahead and put some brackets around a few things here like this. Highlight this entire middle column here like this, and then you're going to come up here to where it says borders. Click on the side and go to all borders. Now let's click on the independent variable section right there and click on all borders once again. And now if you look at it, we have our table fully made. We could have just clicked over here and highlighted everything like this, but the reason we didn't do that is because we don't really want any of this with, I mean there is nothing over here, so we don't want any boxes around these. That's why we just did it like that. So now that we've got that out of the way, now we can proceed to do a few other things and process this data. So you can see I have the varying concentrations of salt water, and you can see I have 11 different trials. Each of these represents a % change in mass. Any table that you are doing is going to, any table that you look at should have a clear independent variable title and a dependent variable title. And they always need to have units. In our case, it has the unit up here in %, and it has a % unit off to the side. So my units are present, we are good to go. But what else do we need here? And the answer is we need to have a mean. Make sure you write mean. And do you notice some of the data here is all over the place? Like this group got 11.8, but yet everyone else was around the 2, 3, 4 range. This shows there's quite diversity in our data. We need a second category called standard deviation. You may just put SD for that. Standard deviation is basically the range, but we're only looking at the middle data that's right next to the mean. So more on that later, but how do we process this now? Well, to do this, Excel has a few handy tools for us, but you click on a box right there like this for mean, where you want this calculated. And to calculate the mean, you could do it all by hand, or you come up here to our functions box, insert function. And what you're going to do for this is, I have these under my most recently used, but you can just go over here under all, and then you look for average right there. Click on the average, and now you're only going to do number 1. You don't need to do number 2. But what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to highlight this entire row here. Now notice I did not highlight the title, and I did not highlight my mean. I just highlighted the raw data that students got. I'm going to go ahead and click OK for that, and there's our number. I'm going to go ahead and do it again for this one. Click on the box, go up here to functions, and it should be under most recently used now, but click on your average. And again, we're just going to highlight our raw data for this, not the titles or anything else. If you do any otherwise, you're going to get different numbers. We could do this all the way down the row, but that would take forever. Fortunately, Excel has a handy tool, and that is, this is an equation, and it treats it like an equation. So you just simply copy the equation by hitting copy, and then you just basically paste it by highlighting where you want it, right-clicking, and pasting the equation. Just like this. Whoops. I just hit Control. Whoops. Do this again. Control C is copy. Control V is paste. So my computer's a little slow, but I just use my keyboard on Windows. I use Control C to copy, Control V to paste. For standard deviation, well, how do we calculate this? What we're going to do is we're going to go up here to Functions and go back to All, although I think it's actually under Statistics there, and look for STDev. And we're getting really close here. STDev, standard deviation. Click on that, and now again, you're just going to highlight the raw data. What is our standard deviation? Okay, and once you're done with that, go ahead and Control C to copy, and now highlight this and go Control V to paste it. And you can always hit Escape, and that'll get rid of any annoying boxes off to the side. So now that we have that, we also want to put a box around these two, so go highlight these and go back to our border. If we look at it, our table looks really nice, but we are still lacking a couple other things, and that is, let's go up here and highlight our independent variable and our title. And while we're at it, let's hold down Control, and we're going to highlight the dependent variable section as well. Although notice that's not going to let me do it, so because I don't want those two cells right there. So you know what, let's just not highlight that. I'm just going to do this section here first and go up here to Paint, and let's go give it a slight gray color. We don't want anything too dark, and if you were going to print this, you don't want it too dark either. So just let's do a little gray shade like this. And let's just do this section by itself and give it a gray shade, and then we'll do this over here too. Now, why do I do that? Because this way the titles stand out. The independent variable is this, and then we have all our trials of the dependent variable. And there we go. That's really all there is to it. So if we look at our data like this is a pretty standard lab. Now we get to make our graph. And how do we do that in making our graph? Well, I'm glad you asked. To do this, Excel wants to know what is your independent variable and what is your dependent variable. Well, we know our independent variable is these numbers, and that means it's going to become our x-axis. But our y-axis is going to be our dependent variable. But which one of these do we highlight? And the problem is a lot of students just highlight all of this, and then they end up getting a very wacky looking graph. You don't want to do that. Instead, if you think about it, all of these trials are really meaningless by themselves. They are working together to create a mean, and the answer is the mean is your dependent variable. So what you're going to do now is this. Pay very close attention because Excel can be finicky. If yours does not turn out like this, you got to go back and redo it. Click and drag and highlight your independent variable sections, and now you're going to click Control on your keyboard and then highlight the mean, which is your dependent variable. You can now let go of the Control key. So if you didn't do that in that order, go back and see what I did there. But you're going to click and highlight, then you're going to click Control on your keyboard, and then click and highlight the dependent variable of the mean. We've just told our computer that this is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. Go up here to Insert, and we're going to tell the computer we want a scatter plot. Click, and there's our scatter plot. Look at that. And if you get anything that looks anything different than this as far as the graph goes, you probably did it wrong when it came to highlighting your data. So be very careful to that. And let's go ahead and move this to the side. I'm going to adjust the size here just so we can play. We can always resize this later, but just so you can kind of see what I'm doing, I'm going to move this off to the side for right now. In fact, you know what? I'm going to click over here, and I'm going to hit Control and wheel on my mouse. Because if you notice, I can wheel on my mouse and change the size of the screen. You can also go up here to View and change the size too. But this way, just for the video, you can see what I'm doing. We can always resize this later. So what are we going to do with this graph? Well, a couple things. First, I like to get rid of these grid lines. Just click on a grid line and hit Delete on your keyboard. Click on another one and hit Delete. I don't really use them, and I find they're there more for people who just are doing graphing paper stuff, but we don't really need that. So what else are we going to do next? Well, let's go ahead and give your graph a title here, and we'll call this something descriptive. Whoops. All right. So a good title is something that is talking about what exactly is happening there. And generally speaking, it's going to have your independent and dependent variable in there as well. And we can come over here and change the size of our title because we don't want it being too obnoxious. So let's go ahead and put our title right there like this. Okay? And with that said, let's go ahead and play around with some of these other numbers here. So next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and put a title for our y-axis and our x-axis. How do we do this? Depending on the version of Microsoft Excel, you're going to click on the options. I know on earlier versions, such as 2010, the options are up here, but I think on 2013 and newer, the option is this plus. Go over here to Axis Titles and click the checkbox. Now let's go ahead and put in our Axis Titles. And like we said before, these are your Axis Titles. So make sure you put in virtually the same thing for your Axis title. And to do that, I'm just going to, if you didn't see what I did there, I'm going to highlight this, and I'm just going to hit Copy, Control-C, and then down here I'm going to highlight this with Control A, and then I'm just going to hit Control V to paste the title. That way I don't have to retype it, but you could just retype it. Okay. Next thing you want to do, you want to come over here and click Control A to highlight this, and I'm just going to type this in manually. Okay. So we now have a properly titled x-axis and a properly titled y-axis. But wait a minute. How do we get that negative exponent there? Do you notice this -1? This is something typically used in mathematics to indicate per something. So for every 100 or per 100 milliliters of water, what we want to do is be able to get that into what's called a superscript. And on Microsoft Excel, there is a couple ways to do it, but you simply go over here to the font menu, click over there, and click superscript. And that'll make it high up like that. When you're typing this in up on there, make sure you're superscripting that as well, because it won't make sense if you just put -1 or -1 up there. Okay? So now that we have our axis titles, we can stretch this around any way we like to. Me personally, I like to make as much use of space as I possibly can with my graph, so just kind of squeeze that out there like this. But another thing to look at. Notice our independent variable, our data only goes all the way to 4.0. Do we really need to have 5.0 over there? And, you know, I would say we're better off not having that. To get rid of this, double-click on the x-axis. This is going to give us a list of options, and if you notice, it says start at a minimum of 0 and end at a minimum of 0.05, which is basically 5%. Let's get rid of that and just put in 0.04 for 4%. And if you go back to what this is, voila, we just reshape the size of our graph. And if we look at our y-axis, it looks pretty good. Although if I look at it, I'm not so sure that we need to start all the way at 6. I don't think there's going to be anything on our y-axis that's really going to go higher than +4. In fact, 3.7 there is the highest. So let's not even go higher than 4. Let's just go to 4 and be done. So double-click on your y-axis, and let's go to 4.0 instead. Okay? And if we look, that obviously fit much better, and therefore, again, we're making better use of space of our graph. So the other thing we want to look at is how do we get rid of all these decimal places? I mean, after all, do we really need it to go that far in our decimal points? Well, let's double-click it again, and I'll be honest, I'm not sure if I remember this off the top of my head here, how this works. I think if I go to decimal places, let's see if this works here. There we go. So to do this, you double-click on that again and go down here to number. And for decimal places, you're just going to enter 0. We really don't need any more decimal places than that. Okay? At least not on our graph. All right. And with that said, that is how you format your axis like that. Okay? In fact, while we're at it, let's just go ahead and make these whole numbers down here for percentages. Okay? And if I do that, go down here, let's just go ahead and put 0 decimal places. You can do that if you want to, but I think this looks a little better. So, having said that, that is pretty much how we format our axes, just like this. And now what we want to do is do a couple things with data processing. We want to go in there and add a tread line and error bars. So make sure you see very carefully how I'm going to do this, because this is the part that stumps a lot of students, and yet it's really not that bad once you get the hang of it. So we're going to go back to options here and click on the plus, and we're going to do two things: error bars and tread line. But notice I did not click on either of these. The first one I'm going to do is go to tread line, but I'm not clicking on anything. I'm just kind of going over it. Don't click on the checkbox. Instead, come over here to your line option and click on it and go down here to more options. What you're going to do now is examine your data. How does this, examine your data. How does this data, I'll say that one more time. I'm going to go back here, get rid of the tread line, and we're just going to remake it. And I'm only doing this because I want you to be able to see this on your computer. So again, clicking back on that tread line option, which tread line option best fits the data? And a linear one is probably not the best in this case, but if we go to polynomial and we'll do order of 2, it looks like it very nicely fits our data. So you know what? let's go ahead and keep the polynomial data with that. I'm going to roll down here, and if you haven't seen it, it'll say display equation as well as the r square value. Let's go ahead and click on display the equation and display the r square value. And with that said, I'm going to move these into a location where it is easier seen. You can even move it to here, or you can move it up here, but move the calculations somewhere where they're easily seen. And if they're too obnoxious, you can always go over here and resize the r square values as well, so they're not too obnoxious. Okay? So we can use this equation if we were ever going to predict a future forecast. In fact, on your assignment, you're later going to have to determine what the percent change is at 5%, which would be over here. And you can use the equation to do that, or you can just follow the trend line. So now that we've got that, we have one final thing to do, and that is the one that people struggle with the most. Save the best for last. It is our error bars. We want to know, how much error do these each have? Because if you look, some of these are pretty consistent, but then you got one like 11.8, and like this one, 10.40. Clearly that is a huge outlier. We want to know which of these have a very strong outlier. So to do this, we're going to click on our graph, go over here to error bars, and again, don't click on the line, but click on error bars, and go over here to more options. And just like before, we're going to, again, I only moved that so you all could see it, but let's go ahead and click on error bars. And there we go. Now notice this completely screwed up our graph. And there's a couple reasons for this, but one of them is it's got horizontal error bars. We must get rid of these. I do not know why they're on here, and Microsoft Excel has never given a good answer, but click on any of these horizontal error bars, and then on your keyboard, hit the delete key. I don't know why the horizontal error bars are on there, guys, but in all these years, just do your best on it. So now what we're going to do is, well, how do we adjust these error bars? And I'm not sure why that changed there. Let me go back here and see if I can fix this real quick. You know what? Better yet, let's do this. Click on the error bar, more options, and don't delete anything yet because it seems like it's just locking in that as what was there. We'll delete these in a minute. But for right now, for your error bars, it seems like every time I click off the screen, it likes to take that off there. All right, so we'll bring error bars back up. And the reason I was moving the computer screen is I want you to see your standard deviation. You must have that. So click on the error bars, like I said. Don't click on anything. And now what you're going to do, even though it says standard deviation, the computer does not understand this. Do not do that. Go down here to custom and specify value. Now watch very carefully. For positive and negative, we're going to click on each one at a time. Click on the positive value, and you want to clear that out of there, and we're going to go and do this. Highlight your entire row of standard deviation. Go back over here and click submit, and now for negative, do the same thing. Click this, and then erase everything on there, and highlight your standard deviation for the negative. Once you're done with that, click OK, and I said that was the hardest one, but guys, it's really not all that hard. Now let's go ahead and click and delete these horizontal error bars. Now our graph is looking a little bit better. But there's a couple things to take note of on our graph. It clearly pushed us off the screen, so you know what? We are going to have to go back and readjust our y-axis. Double click on this, and it looks like maybe we need to go back to 6 after all. So let's go ahead and put 6.0 in there. And let's see if that fits in our data. Nope, it's still too low because we want to get the top of that bar up there. Let's go ahead and do 7.0. And you will learn very quickly, Excel is a very picky software. You've got to click the right place, the right time. If you look at it wrong, yeah, it gets pretty ugly pretty fast. Alrighty, now if we look at it, I'm going to move this one more time here just so that's in a better place. But if we look at it, it looks pretty good. We've got our error bars, which represent our standard deviation. And the wider the error bar, the more differences we had in our data. If you look at our data, we had numbers all over the place. And this is probably, one of these is probably the best ones. Actually, it looks like this is probably our best one that we have here. And so if you notice from our data too, These potatoes were growing in mass, indicating this was a hypotonic solution between 0 and it looks like about 0.8, 0.9%. About 0.8 or 0.9 would be the isotonic number, and then anything beyond that would be considered hypertonic. You could say beyond that to infinity actually is hypertonic. So knowing that, you can now do your lab report. And here's how you do your lab report. And some of you are not going to like this, but it's just kind of the way it is. You can try and paste any graph, and that is simply by highlighting this and Control C. This will copy your table. But I've noticed in the past people have trouble when they come into Google and try to paste it. You always right-click and try to paste it. And if we try to do that, look what happens. It doesn't paste properly. So this is why you need to do what I'm about to say. If we were using Microsoft Word, this would work. But for this assignment, you're going to have to do something else. You can do one of two things. You can hit Control and Print Screen. This will do what's called a screenshot, and you can open up Microsoft Paint, and then you can just paste it. This will paste your entire screen if you notice here. It's a screenshot image. You can paste this, and then you can just do what I do in a lot of assignments, and that is just kind of drag and move the screen around here like this, and you can do something kind of like this, and that will just kind of copy your table for you. So you can use this to copy the image, but this is slow and cumbersome, but many of you are familiar with it, so I'll leave it there. The other option is you go to your Start menu, and you type in Snipping Tool. This is the Windows Snipping Tool, and the Macs have a very similar tool as well. So if you're using a MacBook on this with Microsoft Excel, find out what the Snipping Tool is called to do screenshots. But what you do is go to Snipping Tool and click New, and then you just very carefully come to the sides, and then you click and very carefully highlight exactly what you want to copy. And there we go. Now you can go over here to Copy. And now we can come up here in Google and right-click and paste. It's kind of a hassle. I do apologize. The good news is we're just doing this as a simple lab report. On our labs where you are going to have to print them out, you're going to have to print them out on Microsoft Docs, so they will paste fine. For this lab, just because we're submitting them on the internet, that's nothing really to worry about. Let's go back here and copy our graph, doing the exact same thing. And you may, again, do what you wish. Whoops. Let's go here to our Snipping Tool and click here. And go ahead and click here and highlight. And there we go. Copy our graph. Go back here. And under Graph, we are going to paste our results. Now, we do want to try to format these so they fit nicely. So if I were you, I would get on here and just try to move it so it's not too small, but it's not too large. And our graph can definitely be a lot smaller than this. So let's try to get your graph and your table on one page, and if possible, make your graph and table as big as possible while retaining them on one page. Okay, clearly it looks like I made it just a little too big because it's not liking me there, so I'm going to shrink this a tad bit. There we go. So get your graph and table fit on one page, and now that you did that, you can come down here and you can answer these analysis questions. So this will take you a little bit of time, but you guys are given a good amount of time to work on this. Any questions, please see me, and do not wait until the last minute to do this. This will get easier over time. I promise you all that is the case, because we will be doing more of these. But for this assignment, you've learned how to graph or how to make a table of your results and make the table nice and neatly formatted. And you've learned how to make a graph of your results and make error bars, a trend line, and how to calculate the R-square and the slope equation there. So please be careful with this. Make sure your things look exactly like this as far as your title and your R values and that. And with that said, this will be due at a time I'll share with you next week. But good luck to everybody if you want to get a head start on this. This is Mr. McGee.